Evening all on playchess.com and streaming to YouTube. I thought this week we could do a special for the amazing exhibition match played in St. Louis, which is rapidly becoming the centre of chess in the United States. The exhibition match was between two all-time great players. Well, Nigel Short's still an active grandmaster, but Garry Kasparov retired 10 years ago or more. So Garry Kasparov's FIDE rating, if he became activated, is 2812 still. These games, I do not believe they were FIDE rated, but it was an exhibition match which had a very interesting format actually, and time control. The format was one rapid game. It spread over 2 days, but the first game being a rapid game, I think 25 minutes each. I think it was a 10-second delay, not an increment, a delay, which has an advantage that if a game has hundreds of moves, you're not going to end up breaking the schedule. So it's just a 10-second delay. And this is followed by a few Blitz games, 4 Blitz games following it at 5 minutes each, I think, and 3-second delay. So they use this delay concept for the clock. So the first game, let's have a look on the first day of this exhibition match. So this is the 25th of April, 2 days ago. Garry Kasparov playing white. Okay, we have d4, and Nigel Short plays e6. Of course, he's a French defence exponent. He's inviting the French defence of e4, but Kasparov keeps it in more queen's pawn territory. So knight f3, knight f6, and we have queen's Indian territory, c4. Nigel plays bishop b4 check, and Kasparov reacts here with knight bd2. We'll put on a Kibitzer as well, actually, just for checking some technical stuff if needed. c5 was played here, and white plays a3, so he's grabbing the bishop pair. Bishop takes d2, queen takes d2. White's grabbed the bishop pair, but what happens now? C takes d4, knight takes. Black has a solid position. Black castles e3, and now plays d5. He's trying to activate in particular this bishop. On CD, that bishop will be activated. So black's pieces seem okay, potentially. But in fact, after c takes d, there's another option here, just to take with the queen. His e5 will come anyway with tempo to open up the bishop. Knight b5. So offering the exchange of queens. Now, Nigel Short doesn't want to exchange off queens here. White has the bishop pair and the longer term prospects. Black's advantage is more temporary to start off with piece pressure, and white not quickly able to castle here, especially with this next move, queen c6 instead. Keeps an eye on g2, so it makes it a little bit awkward for white to play a routine move like bishop e2 just to prepare to castle. So a little bit of a delay still on castling. We have to move f3. So the bishop wants to move, but in the meantime, now black is kicking the knight. It goes actually to c3, and that is e5, which opens up the bishop. And maybe also e4 would be useful for black. Kasparov stops this by playing e4 himself, but he's weakening a little bit the dark squares. But on the other hand, he's got the dark square bishop. He shouldn't be too bothered by that. Knight bd7, and it looks as though a nuisance threat coming in is like this. So there might be another move white needs to use to sort of make sure he's safe enough here. He actually plays queen f2, which also means if he gets this battery, he'll be stopping that pesky knight from coming to c5 pretty soon. So Nigel Short takes the opportunity now to play knight c5 while he can, and the knight's still heading for b3, bishop e3, knight b3, and it could also swing, of course, to d4 if the d4 square is unattended to, but Kasparov protects d4 a bit more with rook d1. So white still obviously has the bishop pair, but black doesn't seem to have any bad piece. He seems to have pressure, and that knight seems quite interesting on b3 here. Bishop e6, bishop e2, rook fd8, so challenging white's rook. Now white castles. Knight e8, and yes, black has a fairly solid looking position, but I think the engine actually likes white here. White does have the bishop pair and has really managed to castle and get a solid looking position. It should be favourable for white in theory, and this next move not only looks at black's king is immediately attacking here, provoking another weakness to defend, f6, and now a very aggressive move by Kasparov, f4. Seems very logical to hit that e5 point a bit harder. Knight d4, and white has to watch out here for little cheapos in this position. Can you see a little cheapo black might be threatening if given the chance? A subtle one. If I give you 20 seconds here, what would black be threatening? How's your sense of danger here? If black had another move, what would be an interesting move to play after knight d4? So the knight doesn't just look pretty, it's got some functionality here. So black, say black to play again. Well, black to play again, what would be black threatening? Black threatens, just to get some empathy for white's moves here, what would you say? Yeah, there's a threat here of queen takes and a knight takes e2 check, so this has to be attended to. So it's not major strategy, but these things are essential during a game to take account of. So the bishop actually goes to h5 out of harm's way from this forcing move, bishop h5. And we have actually this kind of weakness of the last move. It's not controlling c4, bishop c4. And now, yes, what's going on here? Attacking the rook. You'd think a normal move might be to move the rook away. Rook e1, is that reasonable? Well, maybe not actually. Knight c2 is a nuisance, to say the least. Actually, you know, possibly rook f2 is reasonable, but a much stronger move now. Actually, I don't want to spoil it, but what do you think? What would you play with white here? Your rook is attacked. Do you desperately need to move the rook? Or could you argue black isn't in a position to make these threats? You've got some kingside pressure here. What would you play with white? If I say white to play and let you think about this position, it's very interesting. Any other ideas for white to play? Okay, you may have seen the game before. I hope most of you haven't. But actually, Kasparov in this position played a very dynamic move, dynamic aggressive. He actually played f takes e5, welcoming an exchange sacrifice. So what is going on here? Well, if black ignored that exchange sac, then just taking here, and this is pretty good for white in any case. So black took on f1. And we're going to have this scenario after rook takes f1 where, yeah, black doesn't want to really play f takes, but also there's some nasties here, isn't there, on f7, if takes here. This is also quite dangerous, but queen takes e5, and it's just a dangerous position, which Nigel, he didn't want this. Things like knight d5 and bishop f7, and that would mean the d4 knight's loose as well. So actually black played king h8. And here there's a very incisive move which wasn't played. Maybe Kasparov is warming up in this exhibition match. So this is the first day I think he's warming up. He actually played a move which seems really natural but might not be technically the best here. He played this very nice looking centralizing move, knight d5. And Nigel Short is allowed to show some resourcefulness here in counter-sacrificing the exchange with rook takes d5, which takes some sting out of the attack. It seems, to keep the sting in the attack, it seems here queen h4 would have been interesting, with the idea of bishop g6, and this is very dangerous with these bishops pointing at the king. And if let's imagine here there's rook f8 check, that's out of the question. And let's imagine knight e6, bishop g6. This is dangerous. Here, this is a very dangerous position. Even though that's defending here, white has a strong position here, a very strong attacking position. Even though the exchange down, it's a fantastic attacking position and probably winning for white. But this move, knight d5, it looks really natural though. But rook takes d5, a counter sacrifice. So what is going on here? After e takes, queen takes d5. White still has an advantage, but the attack, some of the attack steam has been taken out. Queen f2, hitting the knight with this battery. F takes, supporting the knight. And we have this dangerous looking queen f8 check, but resourceful defense. The queen goes back. Queen e7 now threatens rook f8. So this is the threat black has to deal with. We have knight f6. And the game kind of fizzles a bit here actually. White, the exchange down, actually plays rook takes f6. He's trying to get to black's king. G takes. Now in this position it would be a mistake actually to play queen takes f6 check. If Kasparov had played queen takes f6 check, then queen g7 is unpleasant actually. This is letting black get the initiative. You know, for example, there's a kickback again with rook f8, and that starts to be unpleasant. So in fact we have bishop h6, just making this a lot more effective as a threat. Now knight f5, a necessary way of defending against queen takes f6. I don't know how many other ways of defending. It seems that it might be one of the only moves to defend this position, knight f5, to crawl the knight back with knight g7 as a defense. If knight e6, then black gets zapped. Bishop f7, a nice double attack here, and this is too much. This position I can just take there, etc. So knight f5, a necessary defensive move. Queen takes f6, the knight crawls back. But how easy it is to destroy black, being the exchange down here with the bishop pair. Queen takes e5. It looks as though this is a very pleasant diagonal to try and set up some sort of battery. So that would be one interesting plan. We have rook c8, bishop f3, so keeping that nasty pin for a moment. Queen f7, and it's here I think that there might have been the possibility of switching the bishop like this, bishop d2 to c3. It seems very dangerous there. White's also a pawn up, and if black counter sacks the exchange, it wouldn't be such a big deal. White would still have an advantage. But in this position, actually, h3 was played. We have b5. And here, bishop e4. I mean, it looks pleasant enough. Is there a concrete threat? Rook e8, though. Queen d4. And now, after queen e7, it seems as though white isn't really getting the time to organise more pressure on g7. We have actually b4 being played. Black's not really threatening anything because he's tied down to that g7 knight. Plays queen e5. After queen d7, we have this check now, and after king h2, with the queen protecting here, rook takes e4 is actually possible because the knight's also on that e8 square. There's no back row mate here. If queen d8, then rook e8. So white actually forces a draw now with bishop takes g7, and then queen d8 check to get a repetition draw. So queen g8, queen f6 check, queen g7, queen d8 check. So this is a repetition draw being forced in the first rapid game. So that was the first thing, but I think it had the effect of warming Kasparov up. We're going to see that, I believe, soon. So the next 4 games are now, we're going to look at the Blitz games. Thankfully, all recorded very nicely. Sometimes in Blitz tournaments, the recordings are not there, you know, missing, incorrect. Now we've got all the recordings of all these amazing exhibition games. But what do we take from this game? Kasparov was nearly his usual self. It was a very, very aggressive position, if we go back, or I could just talk about it. It was a very, very aggressive position. He might have missed a more incisive way of carrying on the attack, but for sure, white definitely had an advantage and messed it up a bit, I would say. But a great game nevertheless. So let's have a look at the Blitz games now on that first day. So here in the first Blitz game, Kasparov was playing black, and we'll take the black's perspective. Kasparov is one of my most favourite players of all time, funny enough, and actually influenced me in playing the King's Engine Defence, for example, and some other stuff. I mean, I think everyone just wanted to play like Kasparov, attacking dynamic style. So anyway, after c4, this is a really interesting question at Chess World. Actually, once someone posed to me about c4, why you can play g6 here, and why do people not play g6 to d4? It's interesting. G6 is more popular actually to c4 than it is to d4, because black maintains the flexibility of the f pawn. Black can have a setup like this, where you can play like this and later use the f pawn if needed. So this is an interesting system against the English opening. g3, bishop g7, bishop g2. So not committing this knight, keeping control on the dark squares. Knight c3, knight c6, d3 from Nigel Short. So yes, it seems a very positional approach. e6. So black is interested in putting the knight here and maybe playing for d5. Now white has something very radical to stop this basic plan in this position. The knight comes to h3 with the idea of going to f4 and keeping a bind on that d5 square here. So we have knight ge7 and knight f4 now, keeping a bind on black against d5 here. Now to counter this is really interesting already. Black doesn't play the kind of standard looking castling move here. Instead, you know, Kasparov wants to play for d5, and ingeniously he plays a6. It's a6 with a difference. This b5 plan here, although it would seem to be a gamut, it would mean d5 becomes possible. Nigel Short now, also, he doesn't want to routinely castle, so they're both very dynamic, very creative players. They're not doing the routine moves. Nigel Short plays h4 as though, you know, this is quite dangerous. Now, a standard recipe against an early h4 to get ready for h5 is to play h6. That was what was played, because now h5 you can react with g5, keeping things closed. You don't have to play h5, which is a concession of the g5 square. This is in some ways more flexible and still defensive. So we have now queen d2, and it's here this concept of playing for d5, which seems inhibited by all the pieces on d5, is triggered with b5 as a pawn sacrifice. And this is the great thing about Kasparov: dynamic games, really aggressive dynamic games. He's prepared to sacrifice pawns for initiative. So c takes, a takes, he's sacrificing a pawn. White's threatening also knight d6 check here now. He gets in his d5. And what does this really mean? Well, sometimes d4 might be handy. It's a very nice structure. It's very aggressive. This bishop is hemmed in at the moment. Black also has possibilities of bishop a6, which could be handy. So how does the game go? e4. And already, engine view is black's, even though black's a pawn down, the engine believes black's already better here. Black actually played, Kasparov played bishop a6. So we have now e takes d5, bishop takes b5, and if you look at the result of this, even though white might be a pawn up here, black has fantastic control on that d4 square, in fact. And if white loses that light square bishop, he'll have some weaknesses which are further accentuated by this inclusion of h4. These weaknesses on the king side could be interesting later, the light square weaknesses. Now both sides castle here, finally, both sides castle. But this seems a very pleasant position, even though it's a pawn down. Black seems to have very nice aggressive pieces. Queen c2. And here we have e5 kicking the knight. Bishop takes c6, knight takes c6, knight e2. Now lesser mortals here might consider trying to defend that c5 pawn by playing a move like knight d4. Knight d4 I don't think is at all as strong as what was played, it's a reasonable move, but what was played is much more interesting. To play rook c8 here, so keeping more tension going in the position. And if obviously now, well not obviously, but queen here is a disaster, hitting the queen and e2. So that's a little way of indirectly defending that c5 pawn with style. Bishop d2. So black has this kind of bind on white's little isolated pawn on d3 here. And in typical Kasparov games, classic ones, he actually tortures opponents when they have a weak pawn sometimes on the d-file. He tortures that little pawn and often combines it with other attacks like against the king. And here we see a little torturing type move, queen d7, as if black's going to build up or have the flexibility to get in on one of these light squares. That will be interesting as well. Rook ad1, and we have a great attacking move now, f5. With the absence of that light square bishop, it seems just this would be crushing. f4, f3, queen h3, crude and crushing. White has to stop this surely. So Nigel Short played f4 to try and stop that. We have now king h7, and now bishop c3. Is white getting organised here? Well, now at this moment when the bishop goes to c3, now black played knight d4. So black's saying to white, you know, you can't take with the knight here because c takes, I'll be pinning your bishop. So this is a very unpleasant knight. And taking with the bishop, that's also fairly unpleasant. Getting a tempo on the queen, this is an unpleasant position for white as well. This looks as though black's got great play here. So what did happen after knight d4? We have this move queen d2. And now we have a situation where e3 is a possible Achilles heel in white's camp here. We have e takes f4, and now rook takes f4, and this center file, the black rooks are able to pile up quite effectively in this position compared to the white rooks on that center file here. Rook fe8, and now it's marking out the e3 square, because what does white actually do about this e2 knight? What can he do in this position? It seems intolerable to keep that knight on d4. If white played a move like rook e1, then something like this threatens knight f3 check. It's very unpleasant. So white bit the bullet and actually played bishop takes d4 here, and we see now positionally black is marking out this e3 square. It's a fantastic square for doubling the rooks behind. If you're playing against sometimes variations of the Dutch fence as white, this is sometimes square to try and control e6 in reverse type positions. But here it's clear the outpost on that file, e3, is going to be painful for white. Rook df1, and black plays rook e3, is preparing to double rooks now, and is also putting, of course, pressure on these two guys. Rook 4 to f3, rook ce8. Black, I think, would welcome rook takes e3. That would be a very dangerous pawn potentially, or could just keep the outpost. Maybe that's even stronger. It's a judgment call, but in this particular position, keeping the outpost might be the more dangerous thing to do, to follow up with something like this. But that wasn't played. We have knight f4, and now queen b7, putting pressure on f3, queen g2, queen a6, a nifty looking move, putting pressure here. Of course, the knight's protecting d3 for the moment. b3 protecting a2 like that. So has white successfully defended so far? Well, we have bishop e5 now. The bishop is prepared to give itself up to win one of these pawns. So we have h5, and now bishop takes f4. Possibly white should have just played rook takes f4 here and accepted the loss of the d3 pawn. This might have been the best option here. Rook takes f4, queen takes d3 might have been the lesser evil move, something like this. And you know, there's still a bit of a fight in the game. But what happens now was actually the move is the insertion h takes g6, which might not have been the greatest inserted move ever. We have queen takes g6, and now if rook takes f4, then rook takes g3. So that's not possible. So we have to have g takes f4. But of course this g file seems really dangerous now. After this next move, queen h5, black is threatening rook g8 to skewer the queen against the king. This is a position where black, you know, is not bothered about these two extra pawns. He's going for the king, and he's also got this potentially dangerous pawn here if it ever gets to e3 to also combine with his attacking on the g file. And in fact here white gives up that e3, makes it transition to a dangerous pawn here. It's a very difficult position here though. What does white actually do to defend this? He took on e3, so we have a very dangerous pawn here, and we're still faced now. Still, Nigel Short is faced with this rook g8. It's just incredibly dangerous position, and it's lost actually. Queen h2 was played, check, king h1, and there's a fatal flaw exposed in white's position here. Can you guess the killing move in this position? Black to play. Can you all see it? What does black play here? So the queen is attacked. What would be your gut instinct? Or rather, should you ignore your gut instinct and play something else? Should you move the queen? What should you do here? It's a crushing final move. If I give you 20 seconds, starting from now. Yeah, sometimes you've got to reject your instincts, sometimes you've got to find a more precise move. In fact, it's such a crushing position, even queen g4 is winning here, but this is much more incisive. e2, just attacking the rook. The pawn's going to queen here if queen takes h5. We just queen, that'll be it. So actually white is forced to resign here because the rook is overloaded. It can stop the pawn, but it's at a big cost. Queen f3 check will be mating white. So this is it. This is the end of the game. White had to resign. So what did we get from this game? Dynamic play. That early b5 to get d5. Black had a great position even though he was a pawn down. White's pawns were fragmented. And later black got a very good pressure on the e file. Doubled rooks more aggressively. Black's rooks, you see that in a lot of attacking games like Nakamura. You look at Nakamura's rooks and he's playing some newly minted GM and their rooks are just uncoordinated. The more experienced players often have coordination in their rooks, coordination in their pieces, and we saw that here. The rooks created that massive pass pawn, and with the kingside attack it was just terminal. So okay, let's have a look at the next game, the next Blitz game. Okay, so Kasparov was playing white in the next Blitz game, changing colours. So e4, and a very tricky defensive opening was played actually. The Nimzovich defense, knight c6, a bit rarer than the usual moves, and a very dangerous weapon in Blitz if you're forcing your opponent to spend more time to try and improvise. So we see knight f3, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, and it looks a little bit like Pirt's territory with g6. Kasparov plays for d5, so he seems to have a nice space advantage. Bishop e2, bishop g7. Both sides now castle, and a positional looking move just in case black has got any intention of b5 later, just clamp things down on the queen side. Bishop g4. White collects now the bishop pair with h3. Bishop takes, bishop takes. Short now plays c6, and we have a5. Yeah, white's slightly better out of the opening here, but black hasn't got any problem piece and might have some play on the dark squares later. These dark squares look interesting to play with. a6, bishop e3, knight bd7, bishop d4, rook e8, rook e1. So keeping the tension in the center, queen c7, Now this b6 square is interesting here. Kasparov aims for that with knight a4. He's interested in getting a knight to b6. If queen takes, then knight b6. Oh, queen takes, knight b6 is embarrassing. We've got that. Where's the queen going? It's going to be trapped. Surely there. It's going to be trapped at some point. You don't want to do that. So the knight's going to b6. We have e5. Or is it the knight going to b6 now? The bishop actually goes there. Knight takes b6. Knight takes b6. Rook moves. Rook e3. So maybe some support for the knight over there. Knight d7. Rook b3 supporting the knight on b6. Very positional. But black seems to have quite an aggressive position now. f5. White takes on d7. Queen d3. He wants to keep this bishop locked in. He doesn't want to play a move like this because this would potentially liberate that bishop. You don't want e4 coming with this bishop activated. c5. Rook b6. It looks a little bit like a King's Indian style position for the moment. Rook c8. c4. Especially with this pawn structure now, it looks familiar to King's Indian style positions. And white now plays b4, which is an interesting way of putting more pressure on that b file, a temporary pawn sacrifice. So c takes rook b1. White's going to be blasting through surely to b7 now. Rook c5, rook 1 takes b4. Black though doesn't mind that. So rook takes a5 here. And now possibly, you know, this is playable. Rook takes b7, but queen b1 keeps any check out first and still reserves that rook takes b7. Queen d8. Queen steps away. Queen f6. White has an advantage here, and it looks as though once this infiltration now to the 7th, the logical thing would be to double rooks on the 7th. And we have, but instead of this, rook c7 or d7 seem tempting. Maybe a bit of caution here. We have rook b2 was actually played. A bit of caution about f2 perhaps. Maybe, you know, the concern not tying down the queen. So rook b2 was played. Rook a3 now. And now we have c5. So potentially getting this dangerous passed pawn. D takes. So another positional kind of pawn sacrifice. Rook a2. Rook takes. Queen takes. So white is now putting pressure on black in terms of the positional trump cards. The passed pawn, and potentially if he gains back one of these pawns, this would be very interesting. We have king h8. And unfortunately now, queen c2. So white's starting his campaign maybe to get back his pawn, but he forgot about his clock. Kasparov actually forgot about his clock, I'm afraid, in this Blitz game. And he actually forfeited on time. Yes, this is the tragic story of this particular game. And so at this point of the match, Kasparov perhaps wasn't totally convinced about his comeback here against still one of the strongest GMs in the world, in the top 100 anyway. So yeah, was he rusty or not? This is the big question now with this game, because he completely forgot about his clock. He was completely immersed in the position. It's not necessarily a completely winning position for white. It's a small advantage. Let's see if this had continued. Say queen d6 trying to defend c5. Queen a4 maybe. And then trying to get to c6, even though white's a pawn down, this is a potentially dangerous passed pawn here. So, this is an interesting position. Okay, but nevertheless, black isn't busted by a long shot, but white might be technically better with best play. Okay, let's look at the next game now. See, could Kasparov actually get himself together more in this match? So the first day, we're now in round 3. The Blitz game in round 3. So Nigel Short playing white against Kasparov. I'm going to flip the board, and this game started off interestingly. Okay, so some Dan has mentioned he did forget, was shocked and looked at the clock and disgusted left the room. Okay. So b3 though in the next game, Kasparov now played knight f6, and after bishop b2, This is a line Magnus Carlsen has been playing against this system. G6. If white wants to give up the dark square bishop for structural damage, it's a fair trade, perhaps, in this position. This is certainly a line I've seen Magnus Carlsen play on more than one occasion against this B3 system. G3, white's not tempted. Bishop G7, Bishop G2. Black plays D5 now. Knight F3. C5. Black is classically occupying the centre here. Both sides castle. E3. Knight C6. It seems very, very logical indeed so far from both sides. Knight E5. Bishop D7. And we have C4. And now, yes, hypermodern pressure with the bishops, doubling of both the double fianchetto. So we have D4, and white does inflict, in fact, structural damage at a certain cost here. White, by playing knight takes C6, is inflicting double pawns here on black. But on the other hand, if you look at this, the bishop's kind of blocked in. Is that enough? Also, we have some light square weaknesses. Kasparov used these two facts against Nigel Short here. We have D3 and Queen D7. There's a nice plan here already. Just mate on H2 if needed, maybe. Queen E2, that prepares perhaps to defend if needed. So Kasparov didn't go all in here with something like Queen H3. I don't think that quite works here. Actually, the D pawn is also another interesting target here. We see the move D takes E3. Now, just in case you're wondering, what about Queen H3 here? Was that plausible? I think actually in this case it might just be that white plays Knight D2. So something like this, Knight F3 just in time, and then white's fine. So maybe another target is needed here before going for the king. We have D takes E3. And yes, the structure doesn't look too healthy, but on the other hand, black has this D file pressure. F takes and now uses that Rook AD8, targeting that D3 pawn and distracting a potentially useful defensive resource just to defend D3, Rook D1. And it's here. Can you guess this next move? Oh, it's great. This is great. Black to play. Black to play. What does black do? He wants to be attacking. That's how he enjoyed chess, and he said that at some point in one of the interviews. How does black play this possession now? What would you play with black? So, nice attacking move here. Any ideas? Will you be depressed with your double pawns, or are you going to try and do something about that? Knight E4? No! Not Knight E4! No! Knight E4. Does that actually do anything? I think white can just take here on G7. No, it's interesting actually. It does use the pin. No, it's not the move I was looking for, but it's actually in black's favour, this position. Knight E4. That's an interesting move. No! You want to wreck this structure here. If you look at many of the classic Kasparov games where he's destroying GMs, he wrecks the pawn chain around their king. He undermines that pawn chain. So we have the move H5, undermining this defensive pawn chain. Even if it's a pawn sacrifice, you'll be splitting up the pawns. Later you get a rook to H8 when you move your king, and it'll be a dangerous attack. H5. The engine likes that move as well. H5. We have Knight C3. Now we have Knight G4 here. Can you see the immediate threat with Knight G4? What is black actually threatening here that white needs to parry? Can you see? Black is threatening what? After Knight G4. What is black threatening here? If black had an extra move, what could he play here? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say black is actually threatening knight takes e3 now, because you know queen takes, there's bishop d4, skewing the queen against the king. So white defends against that with knight a4, trying to control this d4 square. And now black plays bishop takes b2. And what has black done? He's vacated the g7 square. Yeah, he's vacated that square. Bear that in mind. Queen e6 hitting e3. Rook e1. h4. We want to shred this pawn chain to bits. That's what the top priority is in this position. G takes h4. And now we see king g7. Yes, we're just going to play like this. Our rooks are going to be coordinated on the file. Look at white's rooks. They're going to be passive. Black just wants to double rooks now on the h file. Queen g2, rook h8. It's made to look easy in Kasparov's hands, but he's combined various things actually. He didn't go in for the totally crude attack. This is sophisticated. There's multiple points of attack here. d3 is sensitive. He's got a king in a nice position here to support doubling rooks on the h file. Queen g3, rook h5. He just wants to double rooks. It's a beautiful pawn sack. h3 kicking the knight, knight e5. Okay, so now actually black is threatening rook takes h4 in this position, because it takes, we've got knight f3 check. So white has to parry that. He actually, or does he? Does white actually parry that? Well, maybe a move which would parry that was rook f1. In fact, white played rook ad1. Interestingly, and Kasparov actually doubled here. He didn't actually take on h4. There might be a flaw. Let's hold on a sec. A slight flaw in this position, d4, and this would be a nuisance. So that was avoided actually, to play rook takes h4 here. In fact, we just have this doubling, and now with d4 being played, the knight actually retreated. So black is going to collect the pawn though, and it will have that target on h3, coordinated attack on h3 pretty soon. Knight d3, but on the other hand, hold on a sec, knight f4 is coming surely. Rook takes h4. Now knight f4 is not such a problem here. The queen can go to f5 if needed. It wasn't actually played. Knight f4, there's queen f5. That should be okay for black. In fact, the knight went into a more passive state with knight f2. And now we have knight f6. And black has a pretty dangerous position here. If given a move or two, maybe something like this is dangerous. Starting to consider moves like knight e4 later. Queen e5. This might have been a slight mistake in an already very difficult position. On the other hand, it's difficult to suggest what white is doing here. This is great piece coordination on h3. It's difficult position actually. It's probably losing actually. So let's have a look at the game continuation. Queen e5. What does black actually play in this position, you think? Black to play here. Does he want the exchange of queens? What else can he do here? Black to play. There might be a more incisive move than what he actually played, and I'll give you some points for that actually. I'll give you 500 points for what was played or this other incisive move. So black to play here. Alright, in the game actually, rook takes h3 was played. This is really quite dangerous, even if the queens come off. Also, you know, this retreat apparently is pretty dangerous as well. Black keeps the option of rook takes h3, keeping the queens on, and this is also pretty dangerous as well. I don't know what white actually does here. This is a dangerous position as well, with the queens still on. But even with the queens off, it's still dangerous. Queen takes e6. We have this check now inserted. King f1, f takes e6. This is still a very dangerous position. This other rook is joining with rook h2, and then we might have something like this, and we're ganging up on f2. We have king e2 trying to escape. Rook h2. So black is now threatening things like knight g4 or knight e4, just putting the pressure on the pin. Rook h1 is played here, and now rook hg2. So black keeping control, avoiding an exchange of rooks, and still threatening knight g4 or knight e4. We have rook df1, knight g4 now, not only putting pressure there, but also here. That's nice. And that's difficult to actually parry in this position. The e3 square. If it's actually moved forward, in fact, Nigel Short played rook h4 here. If he tries moving this pawn forward, I don't think that helps actually. C takes d4 would be nice. And then there's things like rook e3 check and winning this knight once the king moves. That doesn't help at all. So this is very, very bad position. Rook h4. Rook takes e3 check. Now rook e4 is played here, protecting the knight. And if this is kicked, then rook f4 maybe again to win this knight. So white's pretty desperate here. He actually sacks the exchange. And exchange that because that knight's still pinned. D takes c5. So the exchange up now for black. And after king e3, e5, white had enough here. He resigned. It's a position he can't really get out of. Black's just going to improve the position. This pin is impossible to remove, it seems. And I mean, it's just losing material. If white played on, let's see, if king e2, I think black just improves the position. Maybe something like this. g4 here. It's game over, isn't it? This is pretty much game over with g3 coming up soon. So yeah, it was a very, very nice attacking game, I thought. I hope you agree. It's, you know, this stuff with h5, very aggressive here, and just getting these rooks, you know, look at Kasparov's rooks just coordinating. Really good stuff. Alright, so let's look at the next Blitz game on the first day. So still on the first day here. Kasparov playing white. So d4, and we have this knight c6 kind of Shigurin system. Knight f3, d5, Shigurin defense. c4, bishop g4. There was, you know, many years ago in their rapid exhibition matches, there was a Shigurin game. I think Nigel actually won once. I think he got his king to h5. It was a spectacular game. But let's see what happened here. C takes d5, bishop takes f3, g takes f3. So black is volunteering, in fact, both his bishops in this strange opening. So e5, with this bishop prepared to give itself up soon. Bishop b4, so white gets the bishop pair against the knights. So how do the bishops fare against the knights here? Queen d6. White, of course, has some structural issues. Queen b1. So looking at b7, black castles to defend. And now an interesting move actually. f4 is played here. This might not have been the most solid. Maybe there's some other interesting moves in this position, but let's see. f4, e takes f, check, and Kasparov is actually content to get the queens off here with queen takes f4. He has got the bishop pair, but yeah, what will it be that convincing? Queen takes f4, e takes, knight f6. You know, there's a fragmented pawn structure here. f3, but they do keep the knights out. Knight d5, king f2, knight b6, and we have the move f5 now. Knight e7, bishop d3. You might think, isn't this a little bit fragile, this setup for things like c5? In fact, c5 was played exactly here. c5 played in this position. It seems to be putting some pressure, but the bishops simply get out of the way quite resourcefully now with the move bishop e4, offering a pawn sack. C takes d4, c takes d4. This is okay because losing this pawn comes at a price. bishop c3. Looking at this nice diagonal, white's going to get the pawn back. So let's see, rook a4, bishop takes g7, and splintered, of course, black's pawn. So technically, white's doing really quite well here. He's still got the bishop pair. Even though he's got double pawns, black's pawn structure isn't particularly strong. Rook e8, rook hd1 now. And immediately, this is immediately quite a dangerous position with this bishop pair. This jack here, for example, this sort of thing is looking dangerous for this bishop pair. Maybe, you know, bishop c7 after. We have knight c6 controlling that square. Rook d6, and now it looks awkward a bit for these rooks here. We're going to see something based on this. Knight c4. What does white play in this position? Which seems very, very tempting. Tactically, what would you play in this position? So the rook is also it's attacked. It seems there's a very tempting move here. So white play in this position. It's not actually so easy. I think I'm tricking with this white play here. There's nothing particularly brilliant about the rooks trying to be exploited here, actually. I'm being a bit naughty here. Rook takes c6 isn't a great move. It can be countered here. Black doesn't have to take like this. This would clearly be unpleasant. Black actually has a counter resource here in rook takes e4. So, yeah, credit to Kasparov for avoiding this continuation, because this apparently doesn't give white too much in terms of advantage if we get this position. No, in fact here a better idea might simply be kind of to exploit the weakness of the last move, to use that d7 square and try and build up on b7. This might be a better idea. Technically it might be the best move to actually play just rook d7. But bishop takes c6 is also maybe in white's advantage slightly, just more simple like that. So okay, we actually see though. Oh man, oh sorry, I'm really confusing the matter just analysing that, because this was actually the game continuation. Rook takes c6 was actually the game continuation. Okay, so as I've just shown you, we can't really take here because we're forking the rooks with the bishop. So rook takes e4 was played. Okay, and I mentioned rook f6, rook e7. In fact, white does have a small advantage here. In any case, he actually played f takes e4, and even in this continuation, white has a small advantage. B takes c6. This did happen. Rook d1. So the rook can try and get to that 7th rank, and these two pawns can potentially create a dangerous pass pawn. We have rook takes a2 check, king f3, king c7, and now e5. So these pawns, you know, are potentially generating a pass pawn with something like e6, just to generate a passed f pawn. Rook d2, rook c1 was played. The knight goes back. But black also has got these two pass pawns to try and bring down. Rook a1, king b7. Okay, so it's actually a tricky position. It's a small advantage. Even with this continuation, it's still a small advantage. Can it be nurtured for a win here? We have h4, c5. So this pawn is needed as well. e6, generating a potentially dangerous pass pawn. F takes, F takes. The rook goes to try and defend against that. The king comes in with king e4. Rook e8, king e5. And now black tries to use his pass pawns. a5. We have rook d1 now. King c6. King f6. Check. The king goes back. Knight e3. Now we have check. King b5. So both kings are trying to herd their respective passed pawns. Rook d7. So now what's going on? A4, this is reaching a critical point. E7. Technically black should have been okay, I think, earlier, but somehow he's messing this up. He's going a bit astray. King c6, king e6, knight f5, holding on now to that pawn. Bishop f6, and white now threatens rook d8 to win material here. And it's at this point Nigel Short gave up his knight with the idea that maybe, you know, his pawns are pretty dangerous. He actually played knight takes e7, getting rid of that dangerous pawn, perhaps in the light of that rook d8 coming up. Bishop takes e7. Is this enough for black? Rook a8. Is this really enough? Check here. Rook d5, putting the pressure on c5. Rook comes to defend. Rook d3, stopping the advance of that pawn. Rook a8. Rook c3, hitting c5 again. c4. But now this pawn is stopped. It's got both pieces stopping it now. And if only this pawn can be eliminated, then this is a pass pawn. King f7, trying to eliminate this pawn maybe. Rook a7, stopping the king from going over there. But let's get the pawn ready. h5. Get it to h6 maybe. Rook d7, h6. The pawn is ready at least. And here, it's actually potentially an equal position with best play apparently. Apparently, at move 52 here, black could have considered, it seems, with the two pass pawns here, this might actually be equalizing this position. It's tricky to find in Blitz, but this might be an equal kind of position. I'm going to take you far into this, but it looks as though a logical outcome might have been a draw here. Draw, but that didn't happen, so I've taken you far there. That didn't happen. Instead we see black playing rook d3. The rook goes to c1 here, a3, and actually white has a significant advantage now. King g8, a2, bishop f6, stopping that pawn again with the bishop as well. c3, blunting the bishop. King takes h7. We've got this pass pawn. King c4, king g8. Is white's pawn a bit quicker in this version of the game? Check. Bishop g7, king b3, h7. It is a little bit quicker, surely. King b2, rook h1. And we have a lost position here actually for black, because now rook takes g7, king takes g7, c2. Things are reaching a climax again. But white's queening just a tiny bit quicker than what I showed you before. White queens here, and yes, it's pretty bad actually, this position. If a1, then we just sidestep here with the king, and it's check, and we're going to win that queen. So c1 was played, but now check in any case. Queen c3. And now check here is just winning actually, because white is going to be a rook up. He can't move his king here or lose the queen. So he played this, and black just takes on c3 now. He's winning that pawn. So black has to resign here. So there might have been a moment there, yeah, black with precision play could have drawn, but here he's just lost. It was a pretty tense one, that, with the two, you know, the pass pawns on going at each other. Very intense, that end game. But if we go back to the critical moment where I confused myself, and sorry about that, but yeah, actually Kasparov's move rook takes c6, it turns out when he had played rook takes c6, that was a very interesting move, rook takes c6 in its own right. But technically, as I mentioned, rook d7 might have been a way for even just using the b file. That might have been a bit better with the bishop pair. So we get into this, very very interesting forcing sequence where White's advantage though was still apparently there was a small advantage for White, but it was much trickier than perhaps if White had been a little bit more incisive. But yeah, Rook takes c6. It was resourceful move from Nigel Short to play this counter exchange sack immediately, and yeah, so White still managed to win that anyway. Now on game 2, which was the next day we have this rapid game again, so 25 minutes each for this first rapid game on day 2. Nigel Short playing White against Kasparov and plays e4, and Kasparov is well known as a Sicilian Najdorf expert, and we get a Sicilian Najdorf, so d4, c takes, knight takes d4. So back to good old times. There were fantastic Sicilian defense game encounters between these two, really exciting, mega exciting even. Knight f6, knight c3, a6 from Kasparov, so Najdorf, and we have a quiet continuation, g3, which some of you might know that Adams used this in the recent Gashimov Memorial to score a very important victory. I think it was against Garry, but he played g3. Maybe it was influenced by that. So a quiet g3 here. We have e5 from Kasparov, knight b3, knight bd7, a4. So a very positional approach from White, trying to control b5 and d5. b6. Black is delaying the f8 bishop. He's trying to fight the central d5 square. That's the top priority, it seems. Here, bishop g2, bishop b7. White castles, and now actually does play bishop e7, as though maybe Black might be interested in castling. Rook e1, but White's d5 control is held together here by these two pieces. If you look at it, well, and the queen here. So it's interesting, this next move, rook c8, as though Black might be interested in sacking the exchange, just to puncture White's control of the d5 square. It's something to be borne in mind here. On the other hand, how sound would this exchange sack be here? White plays knight d2, and it seems this rerouting could be useful for something like this, to control d5 and f5 from there. Does Kasparov want to routinely castle here? Well, actually, he played a more attacking looking move, h5. We have knight f1. Maybe it was an idea to try and stop this attack, but a move like h4 is always going to weaken the g4 square. This doesn't look too convincing to weaken g4. h3 doesn't either look too convincing. Black could just play h4. So maybe, objectively, this might be the best thing, just to ignore this h-pawn attack. But they're very dangerous, these attacks, especially in Blitz. So we have this move h4, knight e3. So White's playing positionally, and Kasparov is seemingly just having fun with his h-pawns in this match. So White's got this very prosaic control of d5 now. We have the move g6, at least stopping the knight using f5, if that really was a threat here, which it probably was, because d6 could be tortured. So g6 stopping knight f5. Rook e2 now was played. Interesting move here, rook e2. Might have been a small inaccuracy actually. Maybe it's time to actually put something into d5. Something like this doesn't seem entirely bad. White would seem to have something going positionally here, for example, like this. Can this be that bad? Not maybe queen takes, because there's rook takes c2. Maybe that's okay for Black, at least. But this position doesn't seem as though White should be in any major difficulties. But on the other hand, this rook e2, yes, it's a slightly suspect move against Kasparov, because now, can you see what Black actually played? So Black to play here, it kind of invited this next move, rook e2. So what would you play in this position with Black? Any ideas? You might have some ideas if you just remember what I've said about the centre and d5 earlier. Central control, trying to knock out white's central control. How would you knock out white's central control here? So I kind of tricked you actually. Well, actually, yeah, both moves. Yeah, there's actually a move order as well here. Yeah, rook takes c3 is interesting here, but first actually there was hg was inserted first, and then we do get this exchange sacrifice now. So b takes c. So the exchange sacrifice wins a pawn immediately, and it makes the position a little bit more difficult for white to play. White is now faced with knight takes c3, forking queen and rook. So we have this bishop going to b2, which doesn't seem too healthy. It's not the healthiest dark square bishop ever. So, you know, black has a certain compensation. Knight df6. He controls quite well now these light squares in the center. c4, trying to get a grip again on d5. Okay, we have now queen c8. And the queen looks at not just c4, but also maybe coordinating like this with that knight. Knight d5 was played. Knight takes d5, c takes. And it seems, yeah, white might have solved some problems here. And perhaps the technically best move for black might have been to try and grab the dark square bishop and make use of the bishop pair with knight c3. This seems as though black shouldn't have too many problems in this position with the bishop pair. But actually, Kasparov, it's Blitz. He actually went maybe a bit more for the king with knight g5. I mean, this is dangerous stuff. We have here the move c4 played. Okay, and interestingly here, knight h3 is not too convincing actually. Knight h3 check. Maybe the king just goes there. How does black continue the attack? So actually, another way of approaching the position. This pawn's slightly vulnerable here. I don't think it can be taken. That would be pretty dangerous to take because of rook c2. And then what does black do in this position? Say something like this. This is getting pretty dangerous for black. No, actually, Kasparov fixed this as a target here. He actually played a5, which means, well, fixing this one down, but also bishop a6 later. So this could be a very valuable target. Okay, rook c1, bishop a6. The queen comes to protect that pawn a bit. We have now queen g4, so hitting the rook. The other one protects. And now actually the bishop comes to c8. So we've got ideas like queen h5 now, and this, and bishop g4, bishop f5. So there's still some attacking prospects here in this position, which need to be defended against. We have the move f4 being played, and Kasparov throws in a check now. King f1, f6, trying to keep this bishop blunted. f6. You might ask, well, hold on a sec, what about this b6 pawn? In fact, queen f3 was played. The trouble is, black's now on g3 after f4 in any case. Can't lose g3. So the queen comes to try and exchange off. Queen f5. And yes, it is actually a good position for white here. To his credit, he has actually reached a decent position. Nigel is doing well. It's at move 29. He's doing well here. And it seems a move like bishop a3 or queen e3, technically white's doing quite well. He actually played rook e4. Now we have king f7 being played, and rook c e2. So is white coordinating quite well on e5. Queen g4. We have now f takes e5. This might not have been the most accurate way of playing the position. If alternatively queen b3, say, and then keeping this tension, keeping the queens on. This might have been another interesting way of playing it, but with f takes e5, it seems how difficult it is for white to play the position now. It's interesting. Bishop takes, d takes e5. Black has quite good pieces here, with knight g5 now being a concern to hit these guys. So there is some compensation for the exchange. Rook h4. Now technically black's actually better after rook h4. This might have been an inaccuracy. Rook h2 here, keeping a nice pin, might have been better now. And black has to prove his compensation for being the exchange down. This sort of position is still, it's tricky for black. But with this rook h4, Kasparov took on h4, g takes h4, and he's got that f4 square now for the knight, which is quite nice. And potentially, of course, these two pawns are rolling down the centre if white's not careful. Rook d2, bishop c5. Black is immediately threatening things like bishop h3 check now. Pardon me, bishop h3 check. And if the king moves here, then bishop b4. That's immediately on the cards in this position. As an example, white plays d6. And in fact, we do get check. And we do, this happens, bishop b4. So getting the exchange back, potentially. King d1. Does Kasparov want to take the exchange back here? He could do, and he's back in the game. He's well back in the game. But actually he plays an even stronger move. Instead of just automatically recapturing the exchange, can you see what black plays here? Black's play. Even stronger. What would you be tempted to do here? Any ideas? Right, I'm going to show you. Now. Okay, bishop d7 actually. He just hits a4 instead. He's saying, well, is your rook really worth that much here? I mean, there's some severe problems to solve if you're losing a4 as well. And you can't play rook c2 because then they'll be skewing your rook to your king. So rook h2, he lets the white rook live here to win another pawn. So it's 2 pawns for the exchange, yeah? 5 against the 3 pawns here, but this pawn's also weak. It's dropping off, isn't it? Yes, it's dropping off. So that's 3 pawns for the exchange, and you start to see now, yeah, that is stronger, surely, than taking that rook. 3 pawns for the exchange, it's not bad with the bishop pair. They compensate for each other's weaknesses, of course. So king b1, and now these pawns, which I mentioned, they could roll forward, can't they? There's no pawns to resist them. f5, they start rolling forward. Bishop c1, e4, not minding any taking here. Bishop h1, the pawns are getting quite menacing. Knight d3. So black's getting a really massive position. He's actually looking at taking the rook now. Rook e2. Bishop d1, no rest for that rook. Rook d2. Bishop b3, trying to win yet another pawn. Then we'll have 2 passed pawns here. This would be a disaster if bishop takes c4 happens. But on the other hand, what pieces are going to defend c4 here? Nothing can defend c4. White's really looking quite busted now. He's 3 pawns down for the exchange, and he can't even defend that c4 pawn. So desperately counters with an exchange sack. So we have check, okay, rescuing the c4 pawn, but at what cost? He's material down now. He's like 3 pawns down here. King b2, a4. King c3, and now using the nice pin here, we see b5 using that pin, and this helps simplify things. Okay, losing a pawn, but simplifying now. This is surely enough. We've got this dangerous pass pawn here. We've got a 2-to-1 there. Isn't that enough? F4, King D4. And I think White might have resigned here or lost on time, but it looks like a lost position. The engine has it as totally winning for Black, actually. With this pass pawn here, it just looks like an easy win. If Black had to play on, then A3 looks pretty winning. If White takes, you know, the bishop's always defending F4 here, and then we'll make progress. So yeah, very exciting game. But it seems here technically, to be fair to Nigel Short, he missed some opportunity here. This transition into the end game was a bit dicey. It started to get a bit dicey at this point in particular with Rook H4. At this point, White had technically an advantage before Rook H4 was played with this pinning move, Rook H2. Apparently, White was technically better here. Here King G2, for example, and this might have been a different story. This is a difficult position. If taking here, and this is a nasty pin. So yeah, it might have been a different story with this pin. Basically, that's something for if you want to look at this game in detail. Have a look at Rook H2 on move 33 as an improvement. White would still be in the game there. But what happened was actually quite sad, that these pawns have now got inertia in the centre, and F4 is beautiful for the knight to come to F4, and you know, it turns out very rapidly get at least the exchange back very rapidly in this position, especially after D6. But it was really quite a difficult position here now. Instead of D6, if the rook moves there now, then bishop A6, and this is pretty dangerous. Something like this, we can just take on E2. Black was already well back in the game, so I think the problems start stemming from Rook H4 in particular. Let's go on to the next Blitz game. So Kasparov playing White in the next game. Plays D4, and we have knight F6, C4, B6. So is it some sort of Queen's Indian territory? We actually now have F3 being played, knight C6, knight C3, E5. Very odd looking opening. I bet you there's no games in live book with this. Oh, actually there is. There's 16 with D5 here. Okay, D5. But it's pretty rare stuff, this position. Now we have the move E3. Apparently E4 has been played here a few times, at least 9 games. But E3, we're in very rare territory very rapidly in this game. C6. Kasparov now plays knight H3. So we have bishop B7. E4 reinforcing D5, knight G6, bishop E3, bishop C5, White takes on C5, B takes, and is it controversial to play D6 here? Is this pawn a bit of a liability? In fact, that's what Kasparov played D6, not too concerned about that pawn. This bishop looks a bit silly at the moment with these double pawns here. Castling, Queen D2, preparing to reinforce the pawn if needed. But also, there's an idea that knight A4 is dangerous. If White can get that C5 pawn, that would be pretty nice. So that's actually a positional threat here to deal with, knight A4. Black plays Queen A5, perhaps against that. B3. And it looks though, again, with B3 supporting knight A4, this would be dangerous. Attack on C5 here, offering exchange of queens. Queen A3, knight A4 is played in this position, but the queen, of course, is protecting it. Rook FB8. Now Queen C1, trying to get rid of the queens to weaken C5. Check. Queen C3. We have knight F8 now. And Kasparov takes the queen off here. letting that pawn survive. But we have this c5 square is in white's control. White plays c5, so that bishop's still looking pretty grim behind these pawns. It's got no scope now. Surely that bishop, isn't black getting positionally done over? Knight e6. On the other hand, well, the knights still seem alive. Knight f2, a5. Can the bishop just exchange itself off with bishop a6 one day, perhaps? Rook c1. We have knight f4. The knight is kicked back. Bishop c4. So this is looking like a bad, miserable piece. Bishop a6. Why not try and get rid of it? Bishop takes. Rook takes. White still has, though, a nice space advantage here. And with this next move, knight d3, is putting more pressure on e5. We have h5, h4. Black seems to be pretty passive. And long term here now, after knight h7, white does have a strategic break available in terms of a prepared a3 at some point. You can imagine a3 would be useful at some point in this position, just thematically. So bear that in mind. King d2, rook hf8. But first, we have f4 on this side of the board. With the rook supporting this pawn, this seems completely possible to play it like this. So f4, trying to squeeze black perhaps. Rook e8. Rook c e1. So f5 looks to be a nice space gaining move. Black plays f6. And yes, this is looking a bit grim now, because this a3 is still a lurking strategic break in the position, but white first squeezes the lemons over here with f5. The knight is going to the really miserable square. h8. I don't know why I'm laughing, sorry. Knight h8. It's terrible, isn't it? I don't know. This is bad. This is bad news. In fact, technically, there's two breaks in the position. G4 and A3 are both available to white. Under prepared circumstances, both could be pretty dangerous here. Oh dear. Something's gone wrong in this position for black. Okay, so white's got a choice of pretty nice plans. In fact, the engine choice +3 is G4 here. Is that played though? Well, we see rook hf1, knight f7, as though maybe, you know, black's going to seal down against g4. If black's given another move, knight h6, to put a seal on g4 here. Rook f3, knight h6. Yes, battling down the hatch of g4, knight h6. Knight f2, rook a7. Knight b6 now is played, which restricts the rooks somewhat. Okay, king f7. And yes, I mentioned this a3 before. We see this move which does kind of imply that a3 is interesting now. Rook a1. You can imagine a3 takes is a nice pin on that rook on a7. And it's difficult for black to really arrange too much counterplay here. g6. An attempt at least with g6 to try and do something over there. King d3. King g7. White is ready to control this e4 square with the king and knight. So if taking there, if black had taken on f5, white would have been ready with e takes f5 here, controlling e4. That would be a juicy knight on e4. So okay, black wasn't tempted to give white e4 just yet. King g7. But we have now this break, which was in reserve. It's played here, a3. So we're threatening now a takes with this pin. Rook b7, a takes b4. It's pretty miserable, yes. We're going to be left with a weak pawn here on b4. You know, rook a4 would probably pick that up soon. G takes is inserted, e takes. Knight g4. Trying for a little cheapo perhaps. If knight takes g4, that would be a mistake surely, because then there's e4 check. Ouch. Kasparov, funny enough, he avoided that one. He played knight e4 with a beautiful knight on e4. And now we have a takes. And this pawn is pretty vulnerable on b4. This knight hasn't got too much scope to do damage at the moment. So we have actually king c4. The king's actually going for that b4 pawn. Rook eb8. And the king takes on b4. Yes, these knights are not a picture of happiness here, nor the rooks. And it's at this point perhaps it's getting a bit desperate for counterplay. He sacks the exchange with rook takes b6 check. If he didn't, it just looks extremely miserable, the position. It looks like a long-term torture. Maybe the king just gets out of the way. We have things like a prepared b5 later, and these pawns would seem to be breaking through. So we have this exchange sacrifice here where rook takes b6. Does it do much? King c4. Well, now something like this, and this is interesting as well now. Rook b5, b4, rook d5, and actually black is actually threatening rook d4 check to pick up the knight. We have rook d3 trying to extinguish that one. Rook takes d3, king takes d3, knight h6. Okay, the rook comes to protect. King f7, king c4, as though there's an interest in b5 soon, perhaps. Knight h7, or maybe the king's just going to infiltrate to c7 here. We have king c5, in fact. I think b5 might also have been a strong move here. Both these moves are very strong from an engine perspective. King c5. Black's not really doing much in this position, and I think resigned here. Let's have a look. If black actually played something like knight g4, b5 might be good. C takes. Let's stop knight e3. If black's not doing anything, we just take here. Let's just imagine black not doing anything. What are we doing here? I think we just get the king to c7. Once we get this position, then something like knight c5. Yeah, we can probably win this by force this d7, because the rook can probably go around. I mean, this should be good enough. Yeah, I think d7 is going to fall off, but even better, just zugzwang here. Rook f2. Just wait for the knight to move. This knight to move, and then we can just switch over here. So this would be the winning plan. I think the king's just infiltrating to win d7, and then this pawn just crashes through. But yeah, so yeah, but black just resigned though after king c5. I think king c5 was the last move on move 49. Now that was a positional masterpiece. Oh my word. Let's just see that again. How was black? This is a very provocative opening, it has to be said. Very entertaining opening, but I'm not sure it's giving white, quite a space advantage. Black started to have some counterplay issues. I think bishop c5, in retrospect of looking at the game, doesn't look too healthy with this d6 pawn. It doesn't look like a healthy state of affairs. Having this d6 pawn, and with this idea later, this bishop had to be solved, but it led to some other issues. This position here looks as though black didn't have too much counterplay in the game. I think you'll agree. Yeah, it was a bit of a positional torture game, that one. Okay, so okay, let's go on to the next game. By the way, I wouldn't do any. I've even lost to Nigel Short in a simul. Okay, so I can't talk. Nigel Short's one of the greatest British players ever. It's just Kasparov is probably the greatest player of all time. So even if he's a bit rusty. But Kasparov is quoted to have saying something like "gold does not rust." That's one of the quotations you'll find at the moment about the match. Gold does not rust. So e4. Anyway, in this next game, Kasparov was playing black and played the Sicilian defense again. c5. We have knight c3, knight c6, knight ge2. Okay, knight f6, and we transpose into an open Sicilian. but not the night off. This is Sicilian Richter-Rosa system. Bishop G5, E6, Queen D2, Bishop E7, Nigel Short castled queenside, Black castled kingside, H4, A6, King B1, and now we have this move H6. Interesting. H6. White just ignores this actually. He really wants to open up this H file just to get to Black's king. He actually just played F4. Yeah, I think it would be pretty terminal just to take this bishop here. Instead, Kasparov plays Bishop D7 now, just to show that, just briefly. Takes, maybe even stronger than taking. Apparently Knight takes first, then H takes, and I think Black's just going to be slaughtered. Something like this. It's slaughter time on the H file. You get the picture anyway. You can't allow this. So it just has to be ignored, this bishop. We have Bishop D7. Isn't there a slight snag though with this D file? If nothing else, this system offers White some D file pressure. White actually volunteered Bishop takes F6 here, which has the effect of, it seems on an intuitive level, of freeing Black's position a little bit. So Bishop takes F6. But what's the idea? Well, it's this D6 pawn is a bit of an idea with Knight F3 putting pressure on D6. But okay, we have Queen A5 putting counter pressure on C3, and things get really incredibly genius here, because it seems as though hasn't Kasparov left behind a loose piece on D7, and this is amazing. You'd think E5 is strong here, so E5 was actually played. Okay, is this a problem? Black to play here. What does Black play in this position? What would you play with Black? As I say, I think, you know, there was an intuitive feeling that on Bishop takes F6, as though, is it all about chasing a loose piece? The whole thing White's set up, was it really about chasing the loose piece? What does Black play in this position? Any ideas? Okay, well, if he plays something like this, surely just White just plays E takes. It's pretty miserable, yeah. So he actually just sacrifices the bishop. He invites the queen in to take the bishop. D takes, and we have Queen takes D7. And now the clever point here. There's a clever point here. You'd think, is this about Rook D8 in this position? What is this about here? Black to play here. Sorry, I know this is torture testing, but Black to play in this position. What would you play in this position? What would be your idea of sacrificing the bishop? Yeah, it's very, very interesting here, because it seems as though this is a juicy skewer to try and exploit maybe some sort of skewer. But it turns out in this position actually that if Rook AD8 had been played, White is actually okay with Queen takes B7, threatening the knight obviously. And if Rook takes, there's nothing much here. This position doesn't have much going for it, in fact. And in fact, if Black tries something like this, takes, that would be okay, funny enough, for Black. but here white does better with bishop takes a6, and is actually okay, funny enough. Really complicated stuff, but yeah, rook d8 seems insufficient because of this queen takes b7, believe it or not. No, the idea was actually e4 now. So looking at both knights, and if knight takes, then this rook's loose, of course. So if knight, well, when I say of course, let's have a look. If knight takes e4, rook a d8 here, and there's nothing protecting d1. So this is good for black, even if he throws in this check, then nice skewer. So e4 is a powerful looking move, and we have now a slight change of circumstance. The knight, this is just incredible, I've got to say. The knight was actually controlling 2 key squares, but in particular it was controlling e1. So keep a note of that. The knight was controlling e1. Now with e4, knight takes e4 is not possible. So the knight goes to e5, and white's lost his control of e1. We have bishop takes e5, which actually strengthens the skewer here, because after f takes we have rook a d8, and now we have queen takes b7, but this is a major upgrade on what we've seen before, because this e1 square has been weakened. We have now rook takes d1, knight takes d1, and a move that was previously impossible is now possible. Queen e1, with 2 very nice pins here. And d1 needs to be attended to because it will be a mate. Very difficult. White ends up in this position trying to defend d1 with this move, bishop e2 now. So we have queen takes h1, queen takes c6, but still a very difficult position. Even though it's bishop and knight against rook, this is a big problem, this position, after rook d8. What do we do about d1 here? It's very difficult to do something about d1. I'm not sure if you want to appreciate why. Have a go at defending this. White's plan try and defend. White to try and defend. Any suggestions? So we've got some pressure on d1 here. This queen's been bouncing around, isn't it? Amazing, by the way. Just aesthetic, I thought I'd point that out. But what do we do about d1? This is a big problem. Any ideas? Probably best is to play a move like b3. I was hoping someone would say king c1. I was hoping someone would say king c1, because here's a beautiful point of king c1, is that you can play here crushing queen e1. Queen e1 hits the bishop and also threatens queen d2 check. This is a real bone crushing move, queen e1 in this position. Yeah, because if we move the bishop, say we tokenly move the bishop, then check is going to be mating. We just give up the queen here. We've got back row mate. So king c1 is actually insufficient here. This is brilliant. This is absolute genius. So probably technically the best move is apparently b3, but it's miserable. You know, black just has the advantage here. He can just take here. Whoops. If he wanted to, it just takes here. If this had happened, but this is better than the game. It's nearly as miserable as the game continuation. The game is worse. Actually, Nigel Short, maybe in shock, played b4, and this makes things a little bit worse now. Kasparov doesn't allow king b2 with rook takes d1 here. He improves on that with actually a more incisive move in this position. Instead of rook takes d1 here, he plays queen e1 in this position, hitting that bishop. And also b4, that new weaknesses that's been created. So queen takes a6, seemingly defending the bishop. But now queen takes b4 check. King c1 check. And we have a different scenario now, where rook b8 check is dangerous. This is really quite crushing, in fact. Bishop b5 was played here. So white's content just to lose that knight. Well, has to be. If the king had moved here, this looks as though it's going to be mate next move. Queen b4 checkmate. Or here, just mating on c1. So the bishop b5 was like the only move. Queen takes d1. So the exchange up. And also, of course, this pawn is pretty dangerous. Actually, hold on a sec. Bishop b5. I said queen takes d1. Even that wasn't played, actually. Even though that's crushing, that wasn't played. In fact, queen b4 check, king c1. Rook takes b5 was played. This was the game continuation. Sorry. So still the same sort of thing, though. The exchange up. Knight c3. Rook takes e5. Although the rook is loose, there's no way of picking it up with check. We have queen c6, e3, and here white resigned. Yeah, white resigns here. Now, of course, we can say in retrospect that you know when white had this construction with this really aggressive construction, he really doesn't want to play bishop takes f6. I'm sure we all feel that, but when we've got a loose piece on d7, I think you've got to be incredibly precise here in this position to come up with this idea of the e4 move. I think e4 is just brilliant. It maximizes the power of rook d8. It punches white's control of e1. We've got a disconnect issue here. This move just seems to guarantee black the advantage in this position. Whatever way it was played, it guarantees black the advantage. If queen d2, we just play this. This is dangerous. We just take here. This is just better for black. It's crushing. Yeah, this e4 move, it just seems to turn the tables here quite well. So knight e5, white's losing control of e1. Takes rook ad8, takes on d1, infiltrates with queen e1. It's an advantage for black. Okay, let's go on to the next game. Alright, so in this game, Kasparov was white and played e4. Nigel played the French defense, d3, d5. So we have the quiet sort of d3, sort of quiet system. Knight d2, slightly unusual looking move now. Usually knight f6 is played here. We have b6 being played, very rare actually, only 30 games in live book with b6 that was played. Usually, yeah, knight f6 or c5. Okay, so b6, knight gf3, knight f6, c3, c5, bishop e2. So Kasparov is saying, he doesn't need a sharp theoretical debate. He's got a kind of cool spring style position, a lot of energy, a lot of latent power in his position. Bishop e7, white castles, a5, rook e1, black castles, e5. So a little bit of a space advantage in the centre. Knight fd7, knight f1, and white's ready to reinforce this pawn on e5. Knight c6, d4. Black would want to exchange off. That's one of the points to exchange off these bishops. Bishop a6. White takes that. Rook takes. Queen d3. And black, attacking the rook. And black closes the tension in the position now with the move c4. If say rook a7, I mean that looks reasonable just to move the rook as well. But he played c4. So okay, so far it's okay actually. Technically, it seems, at least from an engine point of view, it seems as though this position is okay. Black's got rid of his problem bishop. Has white got an attack? He's got a nice central pawn formation. It looks aggressive, but black on the other hand might have some queenside initiative here. So b5, we have knight e3. The knight, of course, looks to be quite dangerous. You know, you can imagine something like this, and then maybe something is going on the dark squares, isn't it? B4, knight G4, isn't something going on here? Something naughty? A4, black's proceeding with the queenside expansion. White puts a break on that with A3, taking time out on the king side. B takes C3, B takes C3, Rook B6, as though maybe come to B3. But hold on, isn't this pawn now just hanging? In fact, Kasparov just thought the pawn was just hanging here. Maybe black could have played something else here. Maybe something like this. You know, keep hold of the pawn. But does Kasparov want to be distracted by this? Because couldn't it give black a queenside initiative? Well, in fact, the pawn was actually just taken here. Queen A8. The queen returns back. And here, maybe black should have just pursued this queenside pressure. Something like this, just doubling rooks, might be quite interesting, because then we can have something like this and we can target A3 and try and do something with the queenside pressure. But in fact, black played H5 in this position, and that might represent, in a theoretical sense, a kind of weakening of the king side, H5. The knight retreats back. Rook FB8. Yes, it seems as though black's got significant queenside pressure here. But now we have this very aggressive move. White play on the king side. What would you play to try and get some action going against black's king here? So white play in this position. What would you play if I gave you 20 seconds here? You don't want to be run over on the queen side without a fight, do you? So you want to try and get some action on this side of the board. Any ideas? Okay, Kasparov played G4. Yes, he's trying to get some play over here. G4. Black took that. Knight takes G4. And now, of course, we've got this road, haven't we? Couldn't we just move our king? Rook G1. Couldn't we have some fun and games here? Rook 8 B7 is played. And in fact, King H1. And yes, why not? Just use this G file. Knight A5. Rook G1. It's looking pretty dangerous already. I think black might have already misplayed this significantly, in fact. Before we go on, let me just show you. Hang on, knight takes G4. What would an engine have done here? We've got the simple plan of King H1 and Rook G1. Would it have even taken here? I think, yes, it agrees taking is correct, but some emergency defense plan with King H8 is prompted with Queen G8. So the engine might have done something like this with Queen G8. This would be the engine defense. But anyway, Kasparov is not playing against an engine. Knight A5 was played, and we have Rook G1, and it seems pretty dangerous now. Pretty dangerous. Knight H6 check. Looks dangerous with the queen potentially coming to H7 if king over there. So we have Queen E8. Bishop G5, and things seem to be just swarming around the black king now. So Rook B2. Is this queenside attack doing anything? The queen just goes to C1, and now with Queen C1 it's actually quite attacking because bishop takes, and then we've got queen, something like Queen H6 potentially, because this looks to be like mating on G8 if black's not careful. Knight B3, there's Queen takes B2. Knight B3, we just play Queen takes B2. But just to show you what I meant there, I'll just give you a token move. Just say like this. We can take here and play Queen H6 in this position. Maybe Queen H6 or not. Nearly. In some positions that's going to be mating. Anyway, bear that in mind. So King F8 was played. A bit of a panic reaction. So King F8. Queen F4, building up some pressure on the king side. Queen D8. It seems a bit of a grim defense. Bishop H6 here though is played, this is just really dangerous. To sack on g7 and queen h6 seems really dangerous now. Rook e2 seems a bit slow. Bishop takes g7. Ouch. So here the king tries to escape. If king takes g7 here, then this is a mating too. Knight f6 is mating here, for example, like this. So the king tries to evacuate. Yeah, things have gone badly wrong now. King tries to evacuate. This doesn't look too healthy. Knight h6, threatening queen takes f7, checkmate. Knight b6, giving the king an escape. Queen takes, king d7. Okay, so now the next point of attack here is knight g5, so hitting e6. At least the king does make a run for it. King c8, but he's losing quite a few pawns in the process. Queen takes e6, check. Sorry, I don't know why I start laughing about this. Oh dear, the king's made it to the queen side, but at a big cost here. Clearly, queen takes e6, king b8, yes. Knight gf7, hitting the queen. Queen c7. Knight f5. And yes, white's pieces just seem to be taking over this side of the board. Rook takes f2. And we've got nice control of d6 here. Knight 7 to d6. And it is a pretty desperate position indeed here. Just as an example, I mean, if the rook it looks really miserable. If the rook moves here, then, well, it just looks totally lost, in fact. So anyway, so bishop takes d6, knight takes d6. Black, in desperation perhaps, played queen takes g7. Rook takes g7, rook takes. And I'm not sure black's even threatening anything at this stage. Rook g1, and black just resigned. So what do we learn from this game? I think g4 didn't necessarily need to win by force. I've got to say that in Nigel Short's defence, I don't think it was winning by force, this position. The engines have it as okay for black. If you can play the right defensive moves, you don't have to get massacred on the g-file necessarily, it seems. Let's just make sure of this. King h8, this defense here, queen g8. It's still dangerous though. Queen d2, it is actually still pretty dangerous, queen d2, because we're coming to f4. I think the pawn structure doesn't favour the king being here. If the king was here, I think this would be much safer, actually. If the king was on a8, no, this is looking as though things are going wrong here, even in this position, actually, because yeah, I think it's just too difficult to try and defend this. I'm just wondering if the queen side helps inhibit this sort of attack. If we played something like this, rook b1 or knight f8, rook b1. Now this would be dangerous with rook h3. I'm just wondering about this position. Knight f8. Is it really possible to defend this? If we played king g2 here, knight g6, maybe. You would have to be like very accurate in defense if this is actually defendable. I don't know actually. The engine still has this as an advantage for white, but that was the way to go. The way black played it, he just got rolled over rather badly. So knight a5, it's here. This is just totally losing. Knight a5 is nearly +3 after knight a5. In fact. Rook g1 is pretty strong. I mean, even knight h6 check is really dangerous here. Even this would have been extremely dangerous. For example, like this, or taking here. Bishop takes. This is really dangerous for black. This position, it's on the brink of disaster after knight a5. And there was something I mentioned about Queen H6 which I couldn't get working. I wanted to show something about Queen H6 as a threat in some lines. Was it here? It works here actually. Queen H6 actually works here. I mean, basically, we've got back row issues as well. Yeah. Anyway, it was a crushing G-file attack. Okay. What else to say? It was yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the next game. So this is the final game of the match. So probably Nigel Short's feeling a bit done over by this stage. So let's see. He was playing whites then. So Kasparov playing black. D4 knight F6. And he tries perhaps to play a bit more positionally in the opening, a kind of family relative of the dreaded London system. Bishop G5 here, knight BD2, so pretty solid from white here. This is the Torre, London and Cole sort of family, according to the score sheet here. So D6, C3, so we have this dreaded pawn triangle. G5, Bishop G3, knight H5. So Kasparov's choice here is not for the immediate knight takes G3, but maybe to torture the bishop first, with first playing F5 to try and get an even greater concession than just taking on G3. As you'll see now, after E3, there's no rush to take on G3 here. We see actually the move knight D7, bishop D3, E6. And now white castles, queen E7, A4, F5, and you see that F4 in principle, if it wasn't for bishop G6 check, would be quite dangerous. Knight E1, looking at the knights, so the other one comes to protect. And now in fact, yeah, black is gaining some space advantage potentially. We see white playing F4, and already after F4 black is doing fantastically in this opening. I'm not sure this is the right move actually to play here. In this on livebook, we're out of livebook already. Queen B3 is suggested, Queen B3, and this might be still okay for white. But okay, we'll go with F4. That was the game continuation. Kasparov took on G3, H takes, and now castles. Yes, so it doesn't look like a picture of health, the pawn structure here. E4, we have C5, so putting some pressure on the dart squares. D takes C5, and you might think, hold on, isn't white getting a nice pawn wedge here on D takes C5? Isn't there E5 in this position? And this is where maybe the automatic recaptures need to be questioned. This is a moment of genius in its own right. What would you play in this position? Black to play. So he's just played C5 and white's loosened his central control a bit. But what does actually black play in this position? Which actually the engine agrees with as a very strong move here. Black to play in this position. Okay, now it's interesting because, okay, let's just see. My argument was that E5 looked intuitively good. Let's just check this. Maybe white's got better than E5. If E5, that's okay for, that's about equal anyway. But maybe white has a little bit better with Queen E2 apparently. Okay, so actually black played D5 here, so a temporary pawn sack, and he's immediately looking at queen takes C5 check. Okay, Now in this position, if e5 here, yeah, then black just takes on c5, and this is looking very nice, knight e4. So white actually played e takes f5. I'm not sure there was much better to do than e takes f5. Queen takes c5 check, e takes f5, and if black's given some more moves, well, it looks like knight e4 is pretty tasty to try and get this bishop would be liberated on f takes, as well as a nice pawn center. We have knight b3, queen e3, looking at queen takes g3. White defends that, and now this is a really nice attacking maneuver, queen e8. So potentially black is now going to be playing knight g4 and queen h5, going for h2. We have knight c2, knight g4, so there's a mate in 2 fret. White tries to parry that with king g1. We have queen h5 anyway, so mate in 1 fret. Rook f e1 was played here. Is white really defending this? Now if black goes all in with the immediate check, I'm not sure this approach is too effective here. White would be evicting the queen. No, something a little bit more subtle might be needed here. Bishop d7 was played. If we can cut this e-file first, then this is going to be extremely dangerous. Cut the e-file, contest that e-file first, that bridge, even if it gives up the d5 pawn. So queen takes d5 was played here, king h8, and yes, there's another hanging bishop on d7 in this position. Is this another horrible bait for white? Well, he does actually take that. So is this attack really that crushing? We have queen h2 check, king f1, and of course white is controlling e8 here, and if check here, then I think king e2, no, that's still dangerous as well for white, but maybe even stronger. This first move, rook ad8 was played, and he's looking at that loose bishop if nothing else. So the attack still goes on here. Also black has got queen takes g3 as an option. White is giving back the piece, well, has to give back the piece basically. Queen takes b7, has to give back the piece now, definitely, after queen takes g3, because black is threatening mates here in 1, and also that bishop's hanging anyway. So rook e2, rook takes d3, black gets the piece back, and there's all sorts of nasty threats here. This f pawn is hanging for a start. We have knight c5, queen takes f4 check, king e1. Yeah, it's another disaster really for white's king safety. Queen g3 check, king f1. Now we have queen h4 threatening queen h1, checkmate. G3. Rook takes g3. Yeah, white's getting a bit torn to pieces here now. It's kind of a mystery how this happened, actually. We just end up with this position. I think it started with f4 earlier. You know, when I said f4 was a bit dubious, it probably started back then. That white shouldn't have this position without any pawns around his king, in theory. I'm sorry. It's been too long, this session. It's just, I don't know. This is a disaster, isn't it? Oh dear. But anyway, look, there's only a few more moves. Okay, this is the last game. Sorry. I don't know what's happened to me. I don't know. Oh God. Sorry. Like knight e6 was played. Oh dear. Rook g8. Okay, there was a threat here actually of queen takes g7 mate. You've got to keep alert. There's queen takes g7 threatened. So rook g8 defends that. But black is threatening things like knight h2 check and other things. Knight takes g7, knight h2 check, king e1, knight f3 check, king there, rook h3, discovered check. This is bad news. It's just bad news, isn't it? Oh dear. King e3, Queen F4 check. I shouldn't do these sessions. This is the last time I try and do 10 games in one session. Sorry, I'm just cracking up. But to finish off, can you see the final move? Black to play. Black finished off here. Can you all guess it before I play it? Black to play. It's Blitz games. They're entertainment. I'm hoping no one's offended by it. It's Blitz. Blitz is a wonderful form of chess for entertainment. Yeah? And great for the spectators. It's so fantastic that St. Louis organised this exhibition match. It's really great publicity for chess. It's amazing. An amazing match to organise. So can you see the final move? And that's the end of this session. And it's the last time I try and cover 10 games. Okay. You've got it. Knight e5. And it's checkmate. King hasn't got anywhere to run. It's a double check. Checkmate. Zap. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I've been cracking up a bit. It's too long for me. It's too long. I wasn't well prepared for this. For the duration, I'm not usually prepared for 2-hour sessions. Okay. I hope you enjoyed it anyway. And comments or questions on YouTube. So see you next week. Thanks very much.